When my daughter-in-law looked at me across the dining table and said, "You're not needed here anymore," my son didn't even lift his eyes from his plate, and in that moment, something inside me went completely still, not broken, not shattered, just quiet in a way I had never felt before, like a door closing without a sound. I nodded, as if she had asked me to pass the salt. Then I folded my napkin carefully beside my untouched dinner and stood up, aware of every small detail, the ticking clock on the wall, the faint smell of roasted chicken, the chair my husband used to sit in now empty and forgotten. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I simply walked upstairs, opened the closet I had shared with my husband for over 40 years, and took out a single suitcase. By morning, I was gone, leaving behind a house filled with memories they no longer valued. 3 days later, I stood in a quiet office signing papers that would erase everything they thought they owned, and for the first time since that dinner, I allowed myself a small, knowing smile. The motel room smelled faintly of detergent and something older, something that had settled into the carpet over time, and I remember standing just inside the door with my suitcase still in my hand, as if I had not yet decided whether I truly belonged there, or anywhere at all. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn halfway to block the late afternoon sun, and the silence felt different from the house I had left behind, not heavy with memories, just empty and waiting. I set my suitcase down slowly and sat at the edge of the bed, placing my hands in my lap the same way I had done at that dinner table, steady and composed, even though nothing in my life felt steady anymore. For 42 years, I had built a home with my husband, choosing every piece of furniture, planting every rose bush in the yard, believing it would always be ours, and yet it had taken only a single sentence to remove me from it completely. I did not cry. Instead, I reached for my phone, scrolled past missed calls I did not intend to return, and opened the contact I had not used in years, a name that still carried weight. A name that reminded me that not everything had been taken from me. Not yet. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered, calm and measured, and for a brief moment I was no longer sitting in that small motel room, but back in a world where my name still meant something, where decisions were not made over me but with me, and I realized how long it had been since I had felt that kind of certainty. I explained everything without raising my voice, every detail from the dinner table to the suitcase to the quiet exit before sunrise, and when I finished there was a pause, not of confusion, but of understanding. He did not ask if I was sure. He did not question my judgment. He simply said, "Then it is time to act," and those words settled over me with a clarity I had been missing. The next morning, I walked into his office dressed the same way I always had when handling important matters, neat, composed, deliberate, as if nothing in my life had been disrupted at all. Papers were placed in front of me one by one, each line carrying more weight than the last, and as I signed my name carefully, I could feel something shifting, not just in my circumstances, but in the balance they believed they controlled, and for the first time since I had been told to leave, I understood that I had never truly been powerless. By the afternoon, everything was already in motion, though from the outside nothing had changed, and that was exactly how I wanted it to be, quiet, precise, invisible to anyone who was not looking closely. The house was listed before the week ended, not as a desperate sale, but as an opportunity, presented carefully, priced correctly, positioned to move quickly without raising suspicion, and I reviewed every detail with the same attention I once gave to choosing curtains and paint colors, because this was no longer just a house, it was leverage. I authorized the transfer of accounts that had always been in my name, accounts my husband and I had built over decades, money that had quietly sat in places no one had ever thought to question, and as each confirmation came through, I felt the weight of years shifting back where it belonged. There were no arguments, no confrontations, no calls to explain what I was doing, because explanations were a privilege they had given up the moment they decided I was no longer needed. Instead, I moved forward step by step, signing, confirming, closing, until what they believed was theirs was already slipping out of reach, and they had not even noticed yet. 2 days later, the first offer came in clean and direct, exactly as expected, and I reviewed it without emotion, sitting at the small desk in my motel room with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, because this was not about sentiment anymore. It was about timing. I signed the acceptance that same afternoon, my hand steady, my name clear and deliberate. And just like that, the house that had once held every holiday, every birthday, every quiet Sunday morning was no longer part of my life, at least not in the way they believed. The closing was scheduled quickly, expedited by people who understood efficiency, and I approved every detail without hesitation, transferring proceeds into accounts they had never seen, accounts that had always existed quietly in the background. I imagined them moving through those rooms, still confident, still certain everything was under their control, unaware that each passing hour was bringing them closer to a reality they had never prepared for. I did not rush. I did not look back. I simply followed through, step by step, until there was nothing left for them to claim and nothing left for me to lose. The closing day arrived without ceremony, just a quiet morning and a series of signatures that finalized what had already been decided, and when I walked out of that office, there was no longer a house tied to my name, no address they could claim, no foundation left for them to stand on. I spent that afternoon arranging the last details, scheduling the transfer of utilities, confirming that every remaining item inside the house would be handled exactly as instructed, nothing left behind for them to use or reinterpret as theirs. Each call was brief, each confirmation precise, and by the time the sun began to set, everything had been completed down to the smallest detail. I did not feel regret. I did not feel anger. What I felt was clarity, the kind that comes when there is nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to prove. Somewhere across town, they were still moving through rooms they believed were secure, still speaking with the same certainty they had at that dinner table, and I wondered, not with bitterness but with quiet curiosity, how long it would take before that certainty began to crack, before the first question formed, before they realized that the ground beneath them had already shifted beyond their control. It happened the next morning, just as I had expected, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a phone call that came in earlier than usual, the kind of call that carries confusion before it carries anger, and I let it ring twice before answering, my voice calm, almost distant, as if I had already moved on from whatever they were about to say. Daniel spoke first, his words rushed, uneven, asking questions that did not quite form complete sentences, something about a notice, about people coming by, about paperwork he did not understand, and in the background I could hear Ashley, sharper, louder, trying to take control of a situation that was already beyond her reach. I listened without interrupting, letting the silence stretch just enough for them to feel it. Then I explained, not everything, just enough, that the house had been sold, that the ownership had always been clear, that the process had already been completed, and that there was nothing left to reverse. There was a pause on the line, longer this time, heavier, and I could almost picture the room they were standing in, familiar walls suddenly unfamiliar, certainty replaced by something colder, something closer to reality, and for the first time, they had no words ready. They tried to argue at first, not with facts, but with tone, with the same confidence they had always used when they believed they were in control, Ashley's voice cutting through the line, insisting there had to be some mistake, that I could not have done something like this without telling them, as if permission had ever been theirs to give, and I let her speak, let every word settle into the space between us before responding. I explained again, slower this time, that the documents had been signed, that the closing had already taken place, that the ownership had never changed in the way they had assumed, and that whatever they thought they were entitled to had never truly belonged to them. Daniel tried to soften it, his voice quieter now, asking why I had not said anything, why I had not given them a chance to talk, and for a brief second, I considered answering honestly, considered reminding him of that dinner table, of the moment he chose silence, but I did not. Instead, I told him that some decisions do not require discussion, only action, and as the line fell quiet again, I knew they were beginning to understand something far more unsettling than the loss of a house, the realization that they had misjudged me completely. In this deeply emotional story, a mother is forced out of her own home by her daughter-in-law while her son remains silent, creating one of the most powerful family stories that explores betrayal, control, and quiet strength. What begins as a painful moment at the dinner table quickly unfolds into a calculated journey where the mother refuses to react with anger and instead chooses a path of silent resilience, making this one of the most gripping family stories for viewers who appreciate layered storytelling, and emotional realism. As she moves into a small motel and reconnects with a trusted legal ally, the truth about ownership, long-held financial decisions, and overlooked authority begins to surface, transforming her from a dismissed figure into someone who quietly regains control, which is why this stands out among unforgettable family stories centered on dignity and power. Without confrontation or dramatic outbursts, she executes a precise plan, selling the house and reclaiming everything that was always hers, leaving her son and daughter-in-law to face a reality they never anticipated, reinforcing the impact of well-crafted family stories that rely on psychological depth rather than chaos. The final moments bring a sense of calm resolution as the mother settles into a new life, free from disrespect and emotional burden, delivering a powerful message about self-worth, boundaries, and the consequences of underestimating someone who has nothing left to prove, making this one of the most compelling family stories that resonate with audiences seeking meaningful and thought-provoking narratives.